John Wykor, Yvonne Vekor, was born September 25th, 1891 in Chelets, Ukraine. And Billy, he always said that Jesus wasn't born on Christmas Day, except December 25th. He said Jesus was born on not December 25th, but September 25th. And your grandpa knew the Bible well. When he was out of work and during the Depression, he went through all northeast Minneapolis selling Ukrainian language Bibles. And he got the nickname of Bible John. And he knew that Bible backward and forward. When we were kids, he would sit and read the Ukrainian Bible, and he could quote chapter and verse. Anyway, John Wykor, my father, your grandfather, grew up on a small, for that time in Ukraine, large, but the family had about 20 acres and several cows, 2 or 3 cows. Usually family had one over there in subsistence agriculture, but they had more than one cow and were considered big-time landowners. His father and mother. And anyway, back then, there were 3 sons. There was Hitch, or Harry, and then Ivan, or John, and the youngest brother was Matthew. And this is in early 1900s. Well, the Bolshevik Revolution started in southern Ukraine and Georgia in 1907. And the Tsar and Cossack soldiers were charged with putting down the revolution. Well, back then, Bill, this was told to your dad and Uncle Paul and me by Grandpa about 2 years before he died. I think he was 74 years old. And he had us in the living room and told a story which we had never heard before in our whole life. And he said he had something he wanted to tell us now that we were grown men before he passed on. And he said, well, Harry, his oldest brother, under the Russian Tsar, belonged to the church and was supposed to become a Ukrainian Catholic priest or a Russian Orthodox priest. And Uncle Harry told his dad, "Я не буду Choklev Shons. I will not be a dog-blooded priest." And he disappeared. He left home. Well, he surfaced 4 years later working in a sawmill in Detroit, Michigan. That's another story. Well, my father, your grandfather, John, belonged to the Tsar and had to become a Cossack soldier. And he did his duty and became a soldier. Well, Bill, they didn't use guns. These were soldiers, actually cavalrymen on horseback. And they didn't use guns, they used swords and spears. And they were ordered to raid Bolshevik villages and kill everybody in the village, men, women, and children. And Grandpa told us that he couldn't do that. And when they were planning a raid on a Bolshevik village near the Polish border, and they raided at daylight, at dawn, when everybody's sleeping, he said he packed his serf's clothes in saddlebags. He said saddlebags. I don't know if they're kind of saddlebags we're familiar with. But anyway, when they hit the village, he raced right through the village and kept on going across the Polish border. And he said he went about 45 miles, almost killed a horse. And then he went in the woods and stripped off his Cossack uniform, put on his farm clothes, his serf's clothes, and then proceeded to the nearest town and he sold the horse and whatever else he could sell. He said he buried his weapons and his Cossack clothes in the woods, where he was changed clothes. And then Billy he started bumming around Europe, working part-time jobs or any kind of jobs he could get, and picking up languages. And he already spoke Ukrainian and Polish, but he learned some German. He learned some Scandinavian languages. He even learned a little English. And anyway, he was bumming around Europe. This was for about 2 years, and he ended up in Antwerp, Belgium. And he was at the seaport, and a ship had come in from America, and he met a Ukrainian man who was just got off that ship, who had been in America for several years and made his fortune, and has come back to retire to Ukraine and live like a king. And my dad bought that man's passport. Back then, in the early 1900s, there were no pictures in passports, just names. And he bought that passport, and he had saved money, and he booked passage on the motor vessel Zeeland, Zeeland, out of Antwerp, Belgium. And I think, Bill, you have a copy of the manifest of that ship now that your cousin Larry found in Ellis Island's records. Anyway, Dad went to the officer of the ship and told him who he really was, and said that handed him the passport, said this was not me. And he told his story to the ship's officer, and the ship's captain told him that we need strong young men like you in America, and I'm glad you're safe, and gave him new papers and put the correct name on the manifest. And anyway, so my father, Pa, as we called him, Tatu in Ukrainian, got to Ellis Island, came through Ellis Island, and he got a job in a tannery. He said it was dirtiest, rottenest, stinkingest job he ever had, standing in water and acid and crap up to his knees in rubber boots, scraping hides by hand with a big knife. And he was living in a flop house in Brooklyn, and he on a bulletin board in that flop house, there was an apartment house, whatever it was, he saw a bulletin, noticed that the Minneapolis, St. Paul, Milwaukee Railroad was hiring for men to work on the railroad in Minneapolis. And if you qualified, you'd get a train ticket to Minneapolis. Well, he went and applied, and apparently got a physical, or whatever they did back then, and he got the job. And they gave him a train ticket from Brooklyn to Minneapolis with a stop in Detroit and change trains, not planes. And he knew he had a brother, Harry, living in Detroit. And I don't know how they connected, but Pa spent a few hours with him in between trains. And then he got to Minneapolis, and he settled in some kind of flop house in Minneapolis on Cedar Avenue. Back then it was called Snooze Boulevard, because a lot of Swedes and Norwegians lived down there, and they chewed snuff and spit all over the street. Anyway, in the side, Pa never ever chewed or smoked any used any tobacco. He liked to drink alcohol liberally whenever he had a chance, but never took tobacco. At any rate, he's working on the railroad. He's a carpenter building wooden boxcars. And later in life, tearing them apart. Anyway, he met a young lady, Pramac was her name, a Ukrainian girl. And they married, and soon they had 3 children. Firstborn was Olga, who would be my cousin. No, my sister, Olga. And then Jenny was born 2 years later, and then Bill, who's your namesake, born later. And when they were 6, 4, and 2, Katerina died in birth. Anyway, the rumor was that it was that she died in childbirth, but years later we were told it was a self-induced abortion, and Billy will probably never know the truth, which way it was. Anyway, your cousin Larry and I found her grave and at the cemetery on 44th and St. Mary Cemetery, 44th and Chicago Avenue South in Minneapolis. And we also found the graves of my firstborn brother and sister, Harry and Mary. The one died within 24 hours, and the other one lived 9 days. And Grandma was back to work. And she always said that Mrs. Bowling killed the baby by feeding the baby curdled goat's milk. We don't know that. We don't know of that either. But anyway, so then